Welcome to the Azure SDK Community Standup, where we bring you the latest updates, insights, and discussions from the world of Azure development. In this episode, we will be diving into the exciting world of Azure OpenAI. For the last couple of months, we've all been hearing about all the amazing work that Microsoft is doing with OpenAI. So we decided to have a conversation with some people in our team to learn more about this exciting topic. So today we will be talking about unleashing the power of Azure OpenAI. But before we get started, I always like to share this slide with you. In this slide, you can find the contact for the PMs on the Azure SDK team. So we're always happy to hear some feedback, or if you have any questions, or how you're using our product. So you can always reach out to us using our Twitter handle. We're always happy to hear from you and from the developer community. So let's move into the releases for May. So we have several releases this month in the management libraries for initial stable releases for Go, Java, JavaScript, Python, and .NET. We also have some beta releases, and that's exciting, and also for Go, Java, JavaScript, Python, and .NET. So like each month, I have Sandeep joining me on the show. He's a product manager with the Azure SDK team. And how are you, Sandeep? Are you there? Let's see.
Hi, I'm good. I'm good.
All right. Yeah, enjoying the weather and stuff.
Yeah, the weather is good, and we are ready to roll with some AI talk today.
Yeah, are you excited about this topic?
Yes, and I've been using ChatGPT a lot, and now we have a Azure version of Azure AI as well, OpenAI. So it'll be fun, and yeah.
Yeah, well, this month we have a very special guest. His name is Arun Chandrasekhar, and who is the principal product manager for Azure AI Developer Experience. And he will be sharing insights and experiences with us, offering some valuable tips and advice for developers looking to leverage this powerful technology in their own projects. So let's bring Arun live. How are you, Arun? Arun?
Hey, Hector. I'm pretty good.
So Arun, what do you do? Like, what do you do in Azure?
So, I mean, most of my role is really about
In like,
helping developers try to use any of the Azure AI services. It has traditionally been all the cognitive services like speech, language, some of the applied AI services like form recognizer. In the recent past, it's been mostly all the buzz about OpenAI. So it's about all the SDKs and developer tools and integrations that are needed for people to use Azure OpenAI.
Okay, so
that's pretty good. So let's just put this. What is the difference between Azure OpenAI and just OpenAI? Like what makes it different? Why would we use one instead of the other? Can you just give a brief explanation about that?
Sure. I think a large chunk of it, and I'll go through that in the slides in a second. I think a large chunk of it is really about our customers are basically expecting responsible AI principles and basically the ability to run on something that is that provides you a lot of isolation and confidence that things that I can put in there are completely for me, and that is a big chunk of the enterprise promises and other things that we have around Azure OpenAI. And I think that's been the big set of things that I've heard from most of the customers.
All right. I know you have something prepared for us. Uh let's get started.
All right. So, like initially, I just want to talk a little bit about the partnership that we have between OpenAI and Microsoft. I think a large chunk of this is known to most people. We have a multi-billion-dollar investment, but it's also important to know that our missions kind of align very well because OpenAI is really about ensuring that artificial intelligence benefits humanity, and what we care about is empowering everyone to achieve more. And this is kind of where our sort of missions kind of blend into in the context of AI. And really, if you think about it, it's about enabling access to everybody against these sort of really, really sophisticated large language models. And here, some of these are converging. But if you think about GPT-4, it is our sort of latest and greatest large language model around text and generative AI. And everybody on Earth is familiar with Chat GPT, which is a conversational piece. And then there is Codex for code and DALI 2 to produce images. I'll talk a little bit more about these as we go.
It's funny because I keep hearing people using ChatGPT for all of them. Then it's, I'm using ChatGPT for images or something right now. So
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think a lot of this is converging. I mean, ChatGPT can now be used with GPT-4. So it's interesting that now we have this sort of convergence across everything where you could use one with the other. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, Arun, can you explain a bit more about like ChatGPT, which is based on GPT 3.5 versus ChatGPT 4, how we are like making progress?
Oh, absolutely. So I think the big thing to think about is Chat GPT can be accessed using the Azure OpenAI service as a model. The current model that you'd see in preview is GPT 3.5 Turbo. And GPT-4 is a new model that is also in preview that is basically available against Azure OpenAI. So when you provision Azure OpenAI as a service, you can access GPT 3.5 Turbo, you can access GPT-4, both in preview. And because of the fact that if you are a developer trying to build a conversational app, you could build a chat-like app against both of these models.
okay.
That's cool.
So I want to talk a little bit about the broader context of where where Azure OpenAI fits. So like Microsoft Cloud has been doing a lot of work around AI for quite a while, right? So basically, we have a whole bunch of offerings which we call cognitive services around the sort of customizable AI models that are available to you for vision, speech, language, and decision. And really, Azure OpenAI service fits into that space, which is targeted at developers and data scientists. And then we have higher level models built on top of it that you see with scenario based services like form recognizer. And then you have like the application platform itself, which is for any user who wants to consume AI. And you would see that with all the co-pilots that are getting released. So we effectively have a nice spectrum of things, all the way from core machine learning platform to someone using it in their sort of Word or Excel. Right?
So basically, it is like OpenAI. Instead of going to openai.com, I can actually deploy OpenAI in my Azure subscription just as a service, like say Postgres.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I think of it as just another service that you can now go and provision. And the way that because it's part of cognitive services, you would get a cognitive service account. And in there, this is just a kind of cognitive service that you just go and say, hey, in my subscription, I want to create an Azure OpenAI cognitive service.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
All right. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things as that I was mentioning is literally like, why would someone get, like the question that Hector was asking, why would someone get into sort of Azure OpenAI? And I think the main thing here is really nothing new to our customers, because when you think about Microsoft Cloud, it's really deployed within your, so like if you think about Azure in the context of the Microsoft Cloud, it's deployed within your Azure subscription. It's secured by you and it's accessed only by you, and it's tied to your data sets and apps, right? And really people are used to this sort of enterprise grade security with our Azure Active Directory, with role-based access control, with support for every single thing that you can think of from a authentication and authorization perspective. And finally, we have like really sophisticated networking, where for enterprises who want it, where they want to also like secure the channel when they're talking to the cloud.
So basically, this means I have full access to my data, and like we have heard news reports in the past that people are putting confidential data to on ChatGPT. I can safely do that if I use Azure OpenAI. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I mean, actually, if you go to the next, the next slide, really, what when I talk about like us taking trust seriously, we really take trust seriously. So think about it as the key here is that your data is stored encrypted in your Azure subscription, so that nobody can get at it, right? We cannot go and sort of introspect your data. It's stored encrypted in your Azure subscription. And let's say if you want to do things around your domain where you're using data to either train it, or in the recent past you do things where you just sort of bring your own data into sort of your chat application, all of that is provisioned into your Azure subscription under your tenant or customer ID. And the fine tuning that you do is not going to be used in any of the foundation AI models, either in Microsoft or OpenAI. It is completely used for what your applications and your solutions need. And then we also have this ability for you to control aspects of that encryption. For example, you can have keys that you think that, okay, this highly confidential data, I want to control how it gets encrypted. I want to control, and it's everything that you see here is transparent and compliant with some of the top standards like ISO, HIPAA, and so on.
I really like that second point. I mean, I like the three of them, but it makes more sense, and then made me happy to hear that it's not going to use to train the foundation AI models. That's a great point.
And I will focus on the third point. That
Of course.
basically means if I deploy my own Azure OpenAI, I can put my confidential source code in that portal and ask it to like optimize it without having a risk of going it
Exactly.
outside.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
So really, this is one aspect of it. What you saw is really the trust with your data. But then also, we've been working on responsible AI principles across Azure AI for a large period of time, where we think about your privacy and security. But that's one aspect of it. We also think about things like reliability and safety when you think about content, right? Because a lot of this is generative AI is based on content. And we also think about transparency. Can I understand how does this AI where does it get all its data from, how is it sourced? And we're getting really, really serious about this, not just as principles in the abstract, but as things that we want to execute on in reality. So basically, when you go to sort of customers, we start with governance, where you can really sort of understand how to build this sort of responsible AI for your solutions. And then we have a set of rules, and we provide like training and practices around responsible AI principles. And we have started building things like a lot of tools and processes to make it a little bit more transparent, so that you feel that, okay, here. And this is something that we take very seriously, because this is sort of something that a lot of our customers are concerned about, and we care about making sure that there's nothing that we do that is not available for you to go and introspect and figure out how do you make your applications responsible as well. So let's talk a little bit about the core of how would you as a developer start using Azure OpenAI service, right? So fundamentally, there are like three buckets of things that you see today. And as I said earlier, they're converging quite a bit. Today, what you have that is stable and in the public domain is GPT-3, which you would see as sort of some of the best models there are. Da Vinci is one, and you'd see a few for embedding, like the other scenarios like with Ada. But what's really coming, and that's going to be things that are very popular, are the Chat GPT preview model, which is GPT-3 3.5 Turbo, which is relatively inexpensive as compared to, say, using GPT-4, but it is primed for conversational sort of chat-like applications. And then Codex is basically things that you see in Visual Studio Code with Copilot, where you can sort of produce code from the text that you provide. And as I said, a lot of GPT-4 is now capable of doing this independent of using Codex. So you also can use GPT-4 to produce code as well. And finally, the thing that's coming out and that people are very excited about is DALL-E 2, which is again the model that lets you now produce images and not just a text, which is a new field that people care about.
And these are the Chat GPT and the DALI 2, which is openly available in public, and now we are putting it inside our own subscription, like as a customer.
Yes,
The
that's a
same
good
performance.
good point. Yeah, when I say preview here, what I'm talking about is really what we have available in the Azure OpenAI service. So now you get all these models are available to you as sort of models that you can access directly from Azure OpenAI from your subscription. So just a quick example of what this looks like. The key thing to understand here is GPT-4 is a general purpose model that you can use across all these two different scenarios for now, ChatGPT and Codex, where you can basically, I just ask a question, right? I just have the simplest way, which is called a prompt, where I just say, okay, write a tagline for an ice cream shop. and I get a response. That's sort of the simplest scenario. But you can use Chat GPT where now you say, okay, I'm having trouble getting my Xbox to turn on, and then you get a response from the AI, and then you can use the context that was previous. You don't have to repeat that context when you say like, what games do you recommend for my 14-year-old? So that gives you like a nice little set of conversational pieces that are naturally available to you. And then Codex is just taking the same context, but here you're talking about things like, I want to create like a SQL query, or I want to create like code, Python code, or like code in any programming language of your choice. And finally, we talk about DALL-E 2, as I said, where you can just have a very precise question about what is the kind of image you want, and you get an image out there. So that gives you a
It's funny because I've been using GPT a lot to write, blogs and stuff like that. I'm using it to get better at my writing, and I started using Image Creator on Bing for when my kids said, "It's like, oh, I had a dream. I don't remember how it was," and then we put it in there. So it's really nice to see my 10-year-old kid using this new technology to explain something that she vaguely remembers and then put it in an image. This is amazing technology. Yeah.
That's very cool. All right, you go on to the next slide. So one of the things before we go dive into the SDKs is important to understand are what are the aspects of the prompt. So here's the basic structure of what a prompt is, right? So it can get reasonably sophisticated, but this is a very simple example. And if you think about, if you just do one click, you'll see like the entire thing is a text input, and then you have this sort of the blue area on top that you see is some context that you want to add on in addition to the question that you're asking. So extract the mailing address from this email. So we're getting very sophisticated about how to distinguish the context from the prompt, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then we also have completion is nothing but what it gives back. And so what you're seeing here is the typical GPT-3 world, where you just put the whole thing in a text and then send it out to the API. And then token is an important term, and it's very important in the sense that it's used for billing, it's used for throttling, everything. Every unit of work that the AI is doing is really from a token. Think of it as roughly the amount of characters in a word, but it could be like anything from 14 to like 10 to 20 characters that is processed by the GPT model as a single unit, and that's another important thing to remember. So let me switch from here. Can I just present?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
All right. Let me share my screen to show you some of this stuff.
And as Arun was speaking about tokens, if you want to see how many tokens your prompt is for and how it's breaking down, you can always go to platform.openai/tokenizer. As soon as you put your prompt text, it will tell you how many tokens are there.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, it's online now.
Awesome. So one of the things I want to talk about quickly is the sort of hub where you can see a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, and we will keep this sort of as the source of truth for everything that around this Azure AI that you want to think about. So it's basically just a GitHub repository with a README. It has things around OpenAI for Python, for .NET. We'll show as new languages come in. We'll talk about them as well. And then we have some of the other cognitive services here. And one of the things that we want to do, encourage, is for people to come in here, come to our discussions, ask questions. If you have issues, post issues. We really want to get to understand your needs, your pain points, and as well as anything that you find good, not so good, and so on. So what I'll show to start with is probably the sort of quick start around Chat GPT. I already kind of have it here, I think. So I'm just going to go to that tab.
Just really quickly, we can get there to aka.ms/azai, right?
Yes, and it's scrolling at the bottom.
That's scrolling? Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to mention it. Okay.
All right. So and then let's talk a little bit about how to do. I'm just going to talk about basics in this session, and then we might have more sophisticated sort of scenarios that I show you here in future sort of future sessions of this videos. So for now, let me start with the simplest thing, is really how do you create a simple chat app, right? So all this is based on is this quick start here that you see, which is just get started using Chat GPT preview that is linked to from this README. It tells you how to go and create one, and there's access issues. Like if you don't have access, how do you get access? How do you deploy the Azure OpenAI endpoint using either the portal or using things programmatically? And also, one of the things I just wanted to show was if you just use the REST API today, you could do that. You just use the Azure OpenAI endpoint, and you can do things like this. But obviously, if you're a developer, you want to see something native to your language, and that's kind of where we come in, and we sort of give you a client library that's native to your language, and give you different tools like the samples and so on that help you sort of access Azure OpenAI from within your programming languages. So this is a very simple sort of repository just to show you how this works. I already have a code space here. Code space is basically like, think of it as a hosted version of Visual Studio Code, which gives you access to a bunch of additional pre-created environments. And the pre-created environment is defined by this dev container here as to what you sort of see in there. So I already have one created. So basically, if you can create your own, and then you get into this particular one, which is here. This kind of shows you a quick way to access and interact with what we're talking about, with basically to create a chat application. So what you need basically to create a chat application is pretty straightforward. So all you need is the OpenAI library, right? So think of the OpenAI library is the library that is produced by OpenAI for Python, which is available for any developer to access both the OpenAI endpoint and the Azure OpenAI service endpoint. So if you're a developer who's using OpenAI already, this is not going to be very strange for you. It's going to be a very simple way to shift into Azure. So what I'm going to show here is what does it take for you to shift into Azure. So what you really need is to basically specify the API type to be Azure. And then you can say, hey, get me the endpoint. When you provision the service in Azure per the instructions in this Quickstart, you would get an endpoint, and then you can potentially just export that endpoint in here, or you could also define it in a sort of .env file here, or you could put it into a code space itself. Suppose this notion of secrets, if you want to put your key in there, that's another option for you, so that is used, that you can retrieve it from here as the way to access your OpenAI environment. So that's all you need. So all you need is basically an OpenAI endpoint, and you need a key. The additional thing that you see here that is interesting is that you can also have this kind of OpenAI API version, and here you're using sort of the latest version. One of the things that, like, obviously when you think about Azure, this is your instance, and you're provisioning things, you want to be able to understand which version of the API that you're hitting. This is important because the version gives you, like the new version, for example, that is preview, gives you chat GPT capabilities like chat completion, versus older versions will not give you this, right? So it's important for us to give you that control, and that's where Azure has the same OpenAI library, but you add these additional aspects to it as you go. So what does this give you? So basically, if you look at the API that you see here, this is nothing but just as I said, the ability for you to go do a prompt and then get a response. It's basically called a completion, in the sense that it's like the AI is completing what your prompt input is giving, right? So that's because the generative AI that's based on what you have as a question. And the thing with the new chat completion is that there are two things. First of all, just in general, when you think about how to use OpenAI library with Azure, one of the things that you would add is this sort of engine equals chat GPT. And here, the name here it's actually the name of the deployment model is going to be GPT 3.5 Turbo, but you can call it whatever you want. This is another thing that you have to realize, is that what you're doing is you are deploying the models that you want into your Azure OpenAI endpoint, unlike the OpenAI endpoint, which has all the models available to you, right? So here you're controlling what models do you want to be deployed for you to access in your subscription.
And does it affect the cost? Like, if I deploy a lot of model, is it more expensive for me, or is it
No,
just
I mean,
cheaper?
the good thing is basically, if you think about it, we are effectively calling into models that are reusable, the foundational models. The only thing is here you're getting sort of control over the surface that you want to sort of share as you provision. Like if you're the IT person provisioning this for your Azure instance, you don't want too much noise of all the
Yeah.
models. You can just define the ones that you want. The thing that gets the actual the billing that happens and the usage that happens is largely determined by the tokens, as I said, the number of words and the number of requests that you're making, and everything is throttled at that level, not at the level of your model itself. So if you look at the message here, so the structure here is pretty simple. What you have a bunch of things happening here. So the thing with chat completion, as opposed to simple, I'll just send you some text and give me a response, is this idea of system as a role. And here you're saying that you are a helpful assistant. So this is pretty powerful. Think of it as an indication to Chat GPT as to what role should the AI play when I'm doing a bunch of questions to it. So now I can have a whole bunch of iterative set of questions to it, and it will behave as the assistant. And you can make it very specific, saying you're a tax accountant, or you can make the system prompt very specific, and that's where you're sort of giving context at the higher level that I showed you earlier. And then you have these sort of examples here. So the idea here is you're just showing an example of, like, there's a user, the end user asking a question, and then you have the sort of answer as an assistant that you're providing, and then you have the next question. The idea behind this is something called few shot learning. The idea here is, instead of just asking a question, you're giving some context to sort of train the AI on the spot to say, hey, I expect it to behave like this, right? So it's sort of like saying, I'm giving you a few examples so it behaves in a particular way. So that gives you a sense for what this looks like, and basically you just run it like you would run any other Python app. Here this is just a quick start, and what you're getting here is basically the question that I asked here, and it's giving you an answer down here that says yes, other cognitive services support things. So basically the main idea here is that you're getting the same things that you get in the UI with chat.openai.com. But you can now, with this, you have the power to now build your own set of applications. And there are very sophisticated applications that you can build with this. You can bring your own data to it as you give these examples. And we'll talk a lot about that in future videos. And I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what this looks like.
So basically, I can use this client SDK to put like a different face on top of ChatGPT or OpenAI services and train, like send, like user asks a question, I can add additional context and send that query to OpenAI, and it gives me a result and I can present it. So I can basically specialize it to something which I need.
Exactly. I can have a whole bunch of custom applications depending on what you want specifically, and you could have a chat bot that sits somewhere in your website, all the way to do something in the back end where you're iteratively running through a whole bunch of documents and processing them and building summaries out of them. You can do anything you want with the same API. Though it looks like a chat API that is an interactive chat, what you're doing is you're not only doing interactive chat, you're also doing a whole family of solutions built on top of it. One other thing that I forgot to mention this is important, is that if you look at this commented code here, this is sort of, again, some of the value that you can get if you start using Azure as opposed to just the direct OpenAI endpoint. There's this thing called default Azure credential. Now, what this really is doing is saying that, okay, I'm using this Azure.identity library, which is basically a core library in Azure SDK, which lets you get token which is not using the key. So basically what you're doing is, in the API key here, you're overriding what was here. So what you could do is basically like comment this out and replace it with this, and what you will get is, in this case you're using Azure Active Directory. And what that means is you can effectively build these Azure Active Directory users and roles and provision them and use that as the way that you secure this. And this is very important, because now you're not relying just on API keys, which are less secure. I mean, you could secure them with, say, a key vault or one of the secret stores. But the way that you do it here is you have full role-based access control that you can provide to a bunch of users in your organization and how they will access this particular thing. So you can have development teams have a particular level of access. Your business users have another level of access. So that's another powerful value that you will get when you start using Azure OpenAI with Azure Active Directory.
One thing I want to add here, Azure Identity, as Arun said, is based off of MSAL. So it gives you all capabilities of Active Directory. Pretty much anything you can do on Active Directory will work here.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So let me just move on to something that beyond Python. So when you think about like sort of a lot of Microsoft developers want to use the same magic that you see with Python, which is sort of the OpenAI official library, but with .NET. So we also have a first-class SDK for .NET, which supports pretty much everything that you see for the Python library. And it also has some more sophisticated aspects, which is sort of in the streaming chat application. Let me show you a quick example. When you click on that, you would come to this site, which is really under sort of our Azure SDK for .NET. But this is just a test case. But I just want to show you how idiomatic and easy it becomes if you're a .NET developer to use this SDK versus, say, using the raw REST API, right? One of the things that's important that I've kind of highlighted here is the Azure SDK, OpenAI SDK for .NET will also work with your OpenAI endpoint. So what that means is you could do some of the, you can use, if you're a .NET developer and you say, okay, I want to use some of the OpenAI, sort of directly use the OpenAI endpoint, and then when I go like further down my lifecycle, I want to use Azure OpenAI, you can definitely do that, right? So here you're using the simple API key-based model, but you can also switch over and use the default Azure credentials model when you go into Azure. And one of the nice things, if you look at this is just a test case, but if you look at the way that this is being used, is that it's really using very idiomatic await kind of syntax, where you can say, hey, I want to just do sort of a async await for each when I'm getting the responses back from Azure OpenAI endpoint or the OpenAI endpoint. And the nice thing about that is .NET developers are familiar with this, and it just works nicely for them. Behind the scenes, you actually implemented the protocol that OpenAI is using for this, which is really server sent events, unlike, say, typical WebSockets, just to enable this sort of really simple idiomatic way for .NET developers to use this, so that in chat you see when you ask a request, you want to see the response coming back, streaming back as soon as the AI is producing it, rather than wait for the entire response to come back. And this gives you that nice streaming capability using sort of await for each. So let me move on to the next one, which is really a bunch of these samples that Luis, who's from the .NET team, has kept a nice little repository for. And again, here you can do the same thing that I did with Python, where when you go into this repository, you can go into code and go into code spaces and sort of produce the instance that you want. Just switched off. Let me try to restart this. So what this is doing is effectively producing a nice little environment for you right in your browser for you to go and play around with the .NET SDK that you just saw. And the nice thing is, like with .NET, with the polyglot notebooks, you can effectively use .NET with notebooks as well. So this is an example of that, which is pretty fantastic, because it's a nice way to learn how to use if you're a .NET developer, it's a nice way for you to learn how to use the SDK. So let me quickly show you how this works. So basically here what you're seeing is I have the NuGet package, which is azure.ai.openai, which is basically the SDK that I talked about. So you can install it here, and then you can use it just like you would any other .NET library. And if you look at it, very similar to what you saw with Python, you set up the endpoint, you can use the API key. And the difference here is that it's using deployment ID. And the idea behind deployment ID is that it is basically, as I said, the model, and you're giving a unique ID for the model that is deployed in your Azure OpenAI instance, right? So this gives you a sense for how you use the Azure key credential, and then you use the OpenAI client. And here I'm just showing you the old sort of GPT-3 based model, where you're just going to give it a prompt, and you're just defining a prompt, and you're defining a bunch of sort of options with the prompt. You can do exactly this with chat completions as well. But one of the things that I want to point out here are what are these things that you get when that you can control when you're talking about your chat. So one of the things obviously is the max tokens, as in how much do you want the response to have, as in like how many words. Think of tokens as roughly words that you want to have in your response. One of the interesting things here is also temperature. And temperature, basically think of it as this controls the randomness or creativity of the response that the AI is giving, where it can basically control the initial set of like what is known as the probability distribution. But the idea there is, if you give more of this number, you're going to get more creative answers, versus if you give this number less nearer, closer to zero, you're going to get more deterministic answers, depending on your scenario. So with code, you want to maybe go lower because you want to have code that actually works. If you want to get higher, when you go things like creative writing or other things, you might go higher in temperature.
So that's like the same as being ChatGPT that says the more
Yeah.
creative, more balanced, or more precise.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a combination of that with another thing. Like if you think about Bing, the way it's doing it, it's tweaking temperature and nucleus sampling factor, which is also called top P. Think of these two as numbers that you can sort of tweak. Ideally, you want to tweak one of them at a time. So you keep the other one at one, which is sort of neutral. When you tweak temperature versus top P, the difference between the two is top P is constraining the number of tokens that it's looking at. So think of it as in creative writing terms would be like how big is the vocabulary of the poem that you want it to write. Whereas temperature is tweaking the distribution of what are the things that it is going to basically uh, uh, like. It's a little bit tricky to answer. Like, what is the randomness in the sort of probability of things that you're looking at as an entire basket? So temperature is a little bit earlier in the thought process, and top P is a bit later, right? Of the thought process of the AI.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that.
And then if you think about the old, it's still async. You can just still use streaming. The difference is it's a simpler API before chat completions, because you don't want to like necessarily provide things like role and other things which are now new with system role. So it gives you a quick way to say, hey, based on these sort of samples here, it gives you, did you watch anything interesting? It gives you yes or what's about. So this gives you a quick sense for how to use this with Python, how to use it with .NET, which is sort of very similar if you're a developer who's interested in these. Um,
So, are there any other libraries in work for other languages?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things we're doing, and you should watch this space, which is basically AZAI. We're going to come out with libraries for Java very soon, and that's going to be something that a lot of people are very, very excited about and interested in. And that's going to give you some of the goodness, just like you see with .NET. We're also looking at JavaScript as another library that you'll see pretty soon. And we're investigating a good community library for Go as well. All
So,
right.
we'll
Well,
have Python, Java, JavaScript, .NET, and probably Go. So, pretty
yeah,
much all the major languages.
absolutely.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Arun, for this. I wanted to get a little bit more clarification of how things work and why and the differences. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And just a quick thing on just to sum up some of these things. One of the things that I was mentioning was with Azure OpenAI SDK for .NET, we have Chat GPT and GPT-4 support today. One of the things that's coming for future talks that I'm really excited about, and you see a lot of these in build, is this build your own chat application templates in Python and .NET. We have these sort of application templates is sort of the next level of these samples in almost like, it's like samples on steroids, where right now you just see this ability for you to go into code spaces and use like a simple Python piece of code. But imagine if you can take an entire solution architecture where you're using Azure OpenAI with something like Azure Cognitive Search to bring your own data and use that and provision that really sort of systematically using this Azure Developer CLI that we have, which is called like AZD, in code spaces or in Visual Studio Code. So this gives you the ability to quickly spin up end-to-end solution architectures in Python, and we have that's already produced with working with the cognitive search team and with Pablo Castro, and then we have the same thing coming out for .NET. The last thing I want to talk about was ChatGPT plugin authoring is interesting, because you think about, if I want to just use, I can use the same thing. If I want to author a plugin really quickly to be used with chat.openai.com today, I can also use the same notion of these application templates, and hopefully one of our next sessions we can deep dive into that.
So this is definitely you have to go to build this year. There's going to be a lot of announcements. Actually, you are in one of the panels, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is a session with Pablo Castro and Aneta Hybe and myself in build, and I'll also be in the AI booth. So those of you there, definitely come down to the Azure AI booth.
I'm really excited to see what cognitive search is doing too. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. Do you have any questions, Sandeep?
I don't think there are any questions on the forum.
Okay.
So, I think
So
we
this is
can.
what we're gonna do then. I would like you to come back in the next couple of months, and so we can go more. There's gonna be a lot of releases during build, a lot of announcements during build, but there's a couple of things that I would like to do as a JavaScript person, front end mainly. And now knowing this search, cognitive search, and everything, and then Copilot, and all these things happening at the same time, I would like to have something that combines all of these things and just show a person how easy it can be to build something using all these power. So we would like to have you back in the next couple of months. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All
And
right.
for any information on AI, go to akams.azai, which is Azure AI. And you can always reach us at the Azure SDK Twitter, which is Azure SDK.
This I always like to share this one. Remember, if you have interest in learning more about our SDKs, you can go to aka.ms az SDK releases. Keep on top of the blog. We have a lot of information on the blog. One of the things that I want to encourage people is reach out to us either by Twitter or use GitHub. Just set up something on GitHub, send a GitHub issue or something. If you have any features or any things, or you're stuck with something, you can always reach us that way. And the quickest, fastest, I think, is the Azure SDK Twitter. You can just reach out in there and say, you know what, I have more interesting what's coming in cognitive search, which I happen to be the PM, or JavaScript or Go or something. You can always go there if you're having some problems or trying to figure out how to find more information on the SDKs that we're building.
And also remember, like you'll get faster responses on Twitter and GitHub compared to Stack Overflow. So
Correctly, and actually, I like the GitHub option because we can keep track of it. It's easier to assign it a triage and do all those things. But I highly encourage, please be in contact. We're product managers. The majority of us are program managers, so we're always interested in getting more. Uh, you know a relationship with the developer world, so we want to know more what you're doing with our services. Now, Sandeep, just before we leave, I know we're preparing for next month. Do you want to give a quick teaser of what to do next month, what we're doing next month?
in the past couple of years, we have invested a lot on Go as a language. So next month we'll be showcasing our Go SDK and tips and tricks how to use them, and basically insights about our Go SDK. So
Perfect.
stay tuned for next month.
Yeah, follow the channel, the Azure Developer Channel. It has a lot of content. It's not just the Azure SDK, but that way you can just uh, be ready for our next stream. And the other thing is just follow Azure SDK on Twitter, and we'll be there. But for now, I'm gonna say thank you so much, Arun. This was great, and thank you so much, Sandeep. Like every month.
Thanks.
Have a
Thanks,
great day,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Hector. Bye.